Welcome ladies and gentlemen, Porpyric here, and in this video we will discuss the origins of vampires, different strains of vampirism, organized clans of vampires throughout the Tamriel and many more. How vampirism came from in real history. Instead of going about general depiction of vampires as to how they came to be first, I'd like to first explore the origins of vampires in real world folklores and what it means in sociological and anthropological sense. The Romanian Strigoi is one of the original European vampires existing before the English word vampire was coined, which came with Slavic roots. In Romanian tradition, Strigoi are malevolent spirits of wicked individuals who rise from the grave to prey on the living by drinking their blood. They are known to prowl silent forests at nights and transform into owls. The reasons behind the Strigoi's existence are speculated to include fears of accidental live burials, rabies, and as a cautionary tale to discourage children from venturing into the woods at night due to threats of wolves and similar dangers. In the 19th century, Scottish folklorist Emily Gerard collected Transylvanian folk tales that included stories of proto-vampires like the Strigoi. Her writings inspired Abraham Bram Stoker, a writer who had never been to Eastern Europe, to create the iconic vampire story, Dracula. Stoker's Dracula draws from various Eastern European vampire folklore and introduces a distinct sexual dimension to vampire lores, reflecting the Victorian era's anxieties and taboos regarding sexuality. Interestingly, however, Dracula himself was intentionally designed to be unattractive, but his actions, such as blood-sucking, are often interpreted as metaphors for sexual assaults. In China, the Jiangshi is a creature that seeks life energy. Unlike European or Slavic vampires that feed on blood, Jiangshis consume the breath of living. The folklore surrounding Jiangshis involves elements of magic, ki or life force, improper burials, and malevolence in life. A prominent method for dealing with Jiangshis involves using a Taoist talisman on the creature's forehead. While there might not be academic sources to support this theory, it is suggested that this exorcism method reflects Chinese culture, essentially acting as a symbolic way for the exorcist to command the vampire to live. The aforementioned information is to highlight the strong connection between the actual origins of supernatural creatures like vampires and their depiction of fantasy setting, both as a storytelling device and as a cultural reflection. In the Elder Scrolls universe, vampires are real beings, which differs from our world where they are fictional. This reality in the Elder Scrolls challenges the thesis that the vampires are a reflection of culture's fear as stated before. And there are two important points to consider that makes vampires so interesting as a storytelling device. First, that disregarding the cultural aspect wouldn't be enjoyable. And second, that both thematically appropriate and inappropriate creatures can contribute to engaging and believable storytelling. Vampires in Elder Scrolls are in a sense tortured souls. Yes, they are immortal, and yes, they get to slay their enemies and dominate their underlings in ways mortals could only dream of. But ultimately, they are slaves to their thirst and find little comfort in life, or perhaps undead, outside of momentarily fulfilling these desires. Every time they have a moment alone, they are left facing this reality, which is compounded the longer they live and by each new chaos they unleash on the world. Sooner or later, this pain becomes so great that the only way to escape from it is to become more bloodthirsty in your conquest, which only adds to the problem. They still have personalities, however. They still are capable of restraint, and they are capable of drawing amusements out of whoever crosses their path, be it righteous warrior or unfortunate cattle. But ultimately, their existence is defined by endless thirst and servitude.
Still always hungry. There's no prey down in this hole. Need to hunt more. All this hiding and skulking around. Blood. So hungry all the time now. Need to hunt again soon. Maybe the clans have it right. Hunting's so chancy. Why not keep a few thralls?
The origins. From Opusculus Lemebal ta Mezzamorti. As brighter grows light, darker becomes shadow. So it passed that the Aedra Molag Baal looked on Arkay and thought, the Aedra prideful of his dominion, or the death of a man and more, and it was sooth. Baal, whose despair is the wanton oppression and entrapment of mortal souls, sought to thwart Arkay, who knew that not man, not more, not beast folk of all none could not escape eventual death. The Aedra was doubtless of this despair, and so Molag Baal set up a Norn to best death. Tamriel was still young and filled with danger and wondrous magic. When Baal walked in the aspect of a man and took a virgin, Lamae beolfag, from the native peoples, Savage and lawless, Bel profaned her body and her screams became the trickling winds, which still haunt certain winding fjords of Skyrim, shedding a lone droplet of blood on her brow. Bel left none, having shown his wrath. Violated and comatose, Lamae was found by the nomads and cared for. A fortnight hence, the nomad-wired woman enshrouded Lamae in pall, for she had passed into death. In their way, the nomads built a bonfire to immolate the husk. That night, Lamae rose from her funeral pyre and set upon the coven, still aflame. She ripped the throats of the woman, ate the eyes of the children, and raped their men as cruelly as Bel had ravished her. And so, Lamae, who is known to us as Blood Matron, imprecated her foul aspect upon the folk of Tamriel and begat a brood of countless dominions, from which came the vampires, most cunning of the night horrors. And so was the scourge of undead, wrath upon Tamriel, cruelly mocking Arkay's rhythm of life and death through all the coming eras of Aedra, and for all his sadness, Arkay knew this could not be undone. Lamae beolfag, to be blunt, is a literal and metaphorical rape allegory. As a priestess of Arkay, her violation and transformation into the first vampire is a direct insult at Arkay, the god of cycle of life and death. As the first vampire, the state of Lamae beolfag is arguably worse than being a zombie in the context of Arkay, as unlike zombies, vampires are a walking preservation of life and death at the same time, being the literal limbo of two states. One particular thing to note that Lamae Bel states is, "You sought to poison us with your blood, but we survived, and from your poison we grew." Taking that line into account could suggest that Molag Bal did not intend for her to live, or the vampires to come into existence for that matter. The belief about origins of vampire vary, and not all vampires are thought to be linked to Molag Bal or Daedric origins. Some stories suggest that vampires can be created through mortal experimentation with magic as well. In the Iliac Bay region, people believe that the vampires can be created either through magical artifacts or as a result of wizard's curse. In the Third Era, Dunmer nationalists held the belief that vampirism originated in the West through necromancy and couldn't be native to Vardenfell. They attributed this to tribunal temple's efforts to suppress vampires and their cultural aversion to necromancers and foreigners, whom they blamed for introducing necromancy to their land. These beliefs may align with common misconceptions about necromancy and vampirism that persist among the public. In the canon, the weirdest vampires that we know of comes from northern Valenwood. They are the Bone Samu, who look like Bosmers unless shown with candlelight, the Kirillith, who can turn into mist, the Ikif, who are the boar enthusiasts, and the Telboth, who prey on children. In the lore, Valenwood is a largely uninhabited forest, with trees so tall that their canopies shroud the undergrowth in a near-perpetual gloom and darkness. The dominant inhabitant of Valenwood, the Bosmer, either live in along the coast or in the great oaks that lords above its smaller kin. Despite their connection with the tree, the Bosmer themselves are no apex predators. But if they were, why would they even bother with innovations of civilization such as bows, spears, and of course portable lights? The Bone Samu are seemingly the personification of primal fear of dark forests and can be driven back or at least made vulnerable when held under the scrutiny of civilized candles. However, candles don't light forever, and sooner or later the light will snub itself out and the darkness will return. The Kirillith also thematically tie in with the hungry forest theme Valenwood has, though instead of darkness it's the mists. The mist, like darkness, not only provide cover for dangerous predators, but they are also omnipresent. Valenwood, after all, is mostly a forest, yet untouched by civilization, and mists are often thick in these places, leading to the impression that one is always watched by something they just can't see. Anyways, in regard to vampiric lore, the Kirillith seems to be a play on the traditional European vampiric myth in that their weakness is running water. But to the topic, the Ikif's feeding habit could be interpreted as a preservation of Green Pact, where a Bosmer must feed on their kill, though the Ikif's case, there's just multitask kings. The Telboth is very evocative of changelings with theories of these stories as attempts to explain deformities and neurodivergent children's. Effects and properties of vampirism. Vampiric blood also has potent regenerative and curative properties. Even a small amount are said to be able to strengthen one's life force to the point of bringing them back from death's door. They can counter lethal poison, cure normally fatal or incurable disease like the osteocratic fever. The mortals we call vampires are people who are infused with Daedric energy of a very specific type. Pure blood gets it straight from the princess himself. Some steal the power from another, but most, we could say, are afflicted with a type of disease that acts as a bridge or proxy into the mortal soul. The result, regardless of the original point, is a vampire of one stripe or another, blood hungry, hates the sun, etc., etc., and some are even made alchemically. There are two broad kinds of daedric corruption. Let's call them internal and external. External corruptions, where an artifact or an entity magically changes the personality or outlook of a mortal. The power and the temptation of this kind of energy is hard to resist. We can cleanse external corruption through ritual and alchemical treatment. Even little things like your diet can be redirected to get you back on the right course. The other type of corruption is internal, is much harder to deal with. That stems from the long-term invitation of a Daedric prince into your mind and soul. This is the kind of corruption Daedric princes love to create, opening a door into the heart of desperate through bargains, beads, and blackmails. While it's theoretically possible to cleanse that kind of foothold, it almost never works. To be cleansed, one must want to be free of the touch of the Daedra. However, these poor damned dogs, after the corruption, want to be the way they are, which makes it impossible to cure. Different strains of vampirism. There are numerous strains of vampirism. Every province in Tamriel has its own nasty strains. It mutates constantly and results in wildly different forms, depending on region, but today we are going to list only the most significant ones. First, the Noxiphilic sanguivoria. Tracing its origin back to Lamae beolfag during the Second Era, represents a unique form of vampirism. What sets it apart from other vampiric strains is its resistance to the debilitating effect of daylight and instead gaining strength during the night. Furthermore, these afflicted with this strain grow more powerful with each feeding, in contrast to the typical weakening seen with other strains. Another distinguishing feature is their ability to cloak themselves in a shroud of mist, adding an element of mystique to the air. Avoiding full vampirism with Noxiphilic sanguivoria is possible through timely intervention. Seeking the service of priest of Arkay to cure the disease and refraining from participating in the blood ritual necessary for completing the vampirism can prevent its onset. It is worth noting that the only known method for an individual to become a vampire with this particular strain is to undergo exsanguination, with their blood being replaced by the Lamae beolfag herself. This unique process underscores the rare and mysterious nature of Noxiphilic sanguivoria. Number 2. Porpyric Hemophilia. Referred to as the vampire's disease, Porpyric Hemophilia is a malevolent affliction that unfolds in a distinctive manner. When an individual contracts this disease, there is an initial 3-day incubation period, during which subtle changes in the body begins to manifest. During this incubation period, the disease primarily affects the victim's stamina, causing a noticeable decrease in their energy and overall vitality. However, the most ominous aspect of Porpyric Hemophilia emerges on the third night of infection. It is during the fateful night that the disease fully metamorphoses the victim into a vampire, subjecting them to eternal and often perilous existence of the undead. The transition to vampirism comes with a host of physical and supernatural alteration, making the unfortunate victim's permanent transformation into a creature of the night. While Porpyric Hemophilia itself can be relatively easily cured within the initial 3-day period, the same cannot be said for vampirism that follows its progression. Vampirism is notoriously difficult to cure once it has taken hold, and individuals who have fully succumbed to this condition often find themselves locked in a relentless struggle to retain their humanity. It's worth noting that Porpyric Hemophilia shares certain similarities with other less common strains of vampirism, such as Sanuinare vampiris and Noxiphilic sanguivoria. These afflictions too subject the victims to cursed life of a vampire, albeit with variation in symptoms and characteristics, making the battle against vampirism an ever-challenging one for those unfortunate enough to be afflicted. Number 3. Sanuinare vampiris. Akin to Porpyric Hemophilia and Noxiphilic sanguivoria, the Sanuinare vampiris also transforms individual into vampire after a 3-day incubation period. The disease brings weakness during the daylight and an unusual thirst for blood. On the third night, the victim becomes a vampire. While it can be cured within the 3 days, curing full vampirism is challenging. Sanuinare vampiris is prevalent in province of Skyrim. Number 4. Volkihar strain. This strain, much like Noxiphilic sanguivoria, originates directly from Molag Bal. It grants the ability to assume a formidable vampire lord form, yet it largely adheres to the same feeding and sunlight restriction as the Sanuinare vampiris. Number 5. Chaotic Vampiris. Found in the Elder Scrolls Online Greymoor, the new affliction called Chaotic Vampiris is distinct from Sanguinare Vampiris and Porpyric Hemophilia, as it affects those who are already vampires. It was achieved through the use of chaotic creatia, obtained from Cold Harbor, the source of all vampirism. This process allowed for the creation of new vampiric strain, highlighting the bidirectional nature of portals between Tamriel and Cold Harbor. The results of chaotic vampiric infliction is a Blood Knight. These new creations possess greater speed and strength than any vampire yet known. Various clans of vampires throughout Tamriel. Similar to bloodlines and strains, there are countless clans of vampires over different regions of Tamriel. Detailing all of them would take forever and would read like a laundry list, so we are just going to go over some of the most prominent clans. Number 1. Montalion Clan. Led by a daughter of Cold Harbor, which is the claim of their superiority against the other clans. It is one of the vampire bloodlines of Iliac Bay region. Those of the bloodlines are gifted with the ability to cure paralysis and the power of teleportation. The bloodline dominates the area surrounding the mouth of Beolfag River. They are the enemies of Selenu bloodline. Number 2. Vraseth Clan. It's possible that this group could be a remnant of Crimson Scars, or it might be an entirely new assassins guild. Notably, the Crimson Scars were vampiric assassins who separated from the Dark Brotherhood in 3rd Era 421. The Crimson Scars might make their return in the Elder Scrolls 6. However, resurrecting the Crimson Scars might be challenging, considering their leader eventually came to believe that Sithis did not intend for Dark Brotherhood to consist solely of vampires, likely because Molag Bal is the creator of vampirism. To make this concept work, one could imagine a scenario where a member of Crimson Scars disagreed with Greywind's second vision, prompting them to split from the group and depart from Hammerfell with a small faction of like-minded individuals. This splinter faction might choose to follow Molag Bal or refrain from aligning with any specific Daedra or deity, deviating from the traditional Sithis worship of the Dark Brotherhood. Number 3. Anthotis Clan. In addition to their other advantages, these vampires possess the ability to conceal the outward signs of vampirism, allowing them to seamlessly blend into human society. They have established control over a town or a city, where they actively deter vampire hunters by employing their private mercenaries. These mercenaries are tasked with hunting down vampires, but their efforts are carefully directed solely against rival vampire clans and lycanthropes, ensuring the safety of the vampire inhabitants. It's possible that within this group there exists a faction that desires a cure for vampirism, leading to internal divisions and conflicting goals. The majority of these members covertly live in Hegethe, where they assume the roles of priest and priestess of Morhua, the Yokudan goddess of fertility. They tend to the local temples and interact with citizens while concealing their true identities. Underneath the temple of Morhua, there is a concealed tunnel leading to a Dwemer ruin in the western Alkir's desert where they reside. Interestingly, these members do not worship or utilize the shrines dedicated to Morhua themselves. Instead, they have mortal associates who assist in maintaining the facade and appearance on their behalf. Number 4. Selenu Clan. The Selenu are vampire bloodlines found in the Iliac Bay region. Those of the bloodlines are resistant to elemental attacks. Heavy Molag Bal worship in this clan and arch enemies with the Montalion Clan, who also worship Molag Bal. The bloodline is named after Selenu, a Nedic tribal elder of Wyrd from ancient Skyrim, who ordered the attempted cremation of Lamae Bal, the first vampire. Number 5. Khulari is a vampire bloodline in the Iliac Bay region, known for their unique ability to paralyze their victims. The Khulari bloodline is an opposition to the Anthotis bloodline, considering them as enemies. Number 6. House Ravenwatch. House Ravenwatch, based in Ravenspire, led by Verandis Ravenwatch, they adhere to a code emphasizing honor, vigilance, nobility, and restraint. Their mission is to use their vampiric powers responsibly to assist others, only feeding on willing servants and avoiding excess of feeding on outlaws. They undergo regular training to control their urges to kill. House Ravenwatch welcomes vampires who follow Verandis' code, conducts historical research, and works to keep other vampire bloodline and clans in check. Due to their inclusive nature and mentorship, they function more as a clan than a specific bloodline, accepting vampires from various bloodlines to adhere to Ravenwatch's code. Number 7. The Volkihar. The Volkihar vampire in eastern Skyrim, according to the lore, dwell beneath frozen lakes, emerging only to feed. They possess the ability to freeze their victims with icy breath and can reach through ice without breaking it. They share similarities with xerodelic vampires such as night vision, invisibility, and power to control mortals. Some Volkihar vampires appear more monstrous with unique features and have distinct abilities, including reanimating the dead and resistance to sunlight, though it weakens them. They also employ death hounds as guardians. Ancient Volkihar vampires, like those at Castle Volkihar, are pure-blooded and can transform into vampire lords.
There is but one gift I can give that is equal in value to the Elder Scroll and my daughter. I offer you my blood. Take it and you will walk as a lion among sheep. Men will tremble at your approach and you will never fear death again. You contracted a disease, perhaps, but you are no true vampire. Accept my gift, and I promise that you will learn the difference. Refuse me, and I will banish you from this castle. I will spare your life this once, but after that, you are prey. Perhaps you still need convincing. Behold the power! This is the power that I offer. Now, make your choice. Be still.
Gaining additional powers such as summoning gargoyles. They often use thralls while feeding and occasionally feed on sleeping mortals. In the Second Era, a subset of Volkihar Clan fed exclusively on animal blood. Number 8. Nighthollow Clan. Nighthollow Clan, who utilized the void and used said void energy to sustain themselves, as blood gave them no nourishment. They ruled the Ridge and were dubbed the Night Lords by the Ridge folks. The Dwemer inhabited Black Ridge in order to mine Aetherium from its depth. Eventually, the Dwemer would go war in the Aetherium Wars, which destroyed the underground city-state of the Dwemer in Black Ridge. Number 9. Scion of the Blood Matron, or Lamae's bloodline. Another clan or sort of vampiric cult we have is the Scion of Blood Matron, who are the direct lineage of Lamae Baal. They transformed in a ritual called the Rite of Scion. In a ritual, a mortal is introduced to the Blood Matron by a Scion. The mortal is given the title of Initiate, and the Scion becomes a Blood Speaker. The Blood Speaker prepares symbols related to Arkay and Moloch Baal, and then guides the initiate through a series of steps, including drinking from basins, learning about Lamae Baal's history, and defiling the symbols. Finally, the initiate is willingly drained of all blood by the Blood Matron, who may revive them with her own blood if she deems them worthy.
When I was a priestess of Arkay, Moloch Baal ravaged me and left me for dead. A group of nomads tried to purify me with fire, but I awoke, changed.
Poor girl. May these flames purify her spirit.
Elder, what do you believe happened to her?
Her body was mangled, rent apart by a terrible darkness. Its corruption is still on her. I can feel it.
Is it true her wounds healed on their own?
Yes, that is why I insisted we perform this rite at once.
Elder! The girl!
No, we're too late.
No.
Back away!
Moloch Baal, father of torment, we curse you! You sought to poison us with your blood! But we survived, and from your poison, we grew! King of corruption, your children are coming! They will defile and destroy you! When I saw what I had done, I called out to my god, Arkay! I prayed that he would rid me of Moloch Baal's curse, but Arkay did not answer. Arkay! Answer me! I am your priestess! Answer! Moloch Baal said you would not come. He said you turned your light away from me. Arkay! Do you hear me? You are false! I reject you! Arkay the Forsaker, we curse you! You left us to suffer in darkness! But we survived, and in darkness we grew. Now we feed upon your horrors, and will use their stolen secrets to conquer and consume you! Initiate, kneel soul and submit yourself to me! Children, this is your kin. Life still flows within its blood. Tear it out, drain it, so that it may join us! Now you are one of us! I offer you a gift. The catacombs are filled with the Defiler's cultists. Sneak up behind your prey and feast. Relish your new powers. Embrace my blessing.
Vampires are seen as afflicted victims suffering from a disease. Scions, however, are directly blessed by the Blood Matron, granting them stronger blood, greater power, and enhanced beauty. Scion, who are offspring of the Blood Matron, refuses to bow to anyone as they are no longer bound by servitude. While they choose to serve, the Blood Matron wishes for her children to unite and subjugate their enemies, making them more of a subjects. In a curse, they condemn Arkay for abandoning them in darkness, but they have thrived and grown stronger in that darkness. They now feed on Arkay's followers to gain strength to conquer them. They also curse Molag Bal for trying to poison them with his blood, but they have grown from that poison and are now determined to defile and destroy him instead. As the first vampire, Lamae can modify existing vampire strains or create new ones like the Blood Scion form that she devised and reverse the correlation between power and hunger. She can also seemingly exert control over vampires in her bloodlines, as in she can restrict their power, erase their memories, prevent them from transferring vampirism, etc. Given the presumptions that all these bloodlines endured into the 3rd century of Tamriel's 4th era, one could envision the Montalion and Vraseth bloodlines as still holding prominence within the Wayrest and Daggerfall kingdoms in High Rock. Simultaneously, their rival Anthotis and Selenu bloodlines might remain prominent within the Alkir Desert and the region surrounding City of Sentinel in Hammerfell respectively. Why Arkay or Aedra did not help Lamae beolfag? Now let's go back a little on the origins of vampirism and why the Aedra or specifically Arkay did not help Lamae beolfag. The argument in favor to Arkay is as to why he did not help or interfere the corruption of Lamae is that there may have been limitation to what he could do for Lamae. Molag Bal corrupted her to disrupt the cycle of life and death, and it's possible that Arkay, who governs the transition from life to death, could not intervene in a case outside of this cycle. Additionally, Molag Bal might have taken measures to prevent Arkay from communicating with Lamae, making her corruption harder to undo. Molag Bal's action in turning Lamae into a vampire were unprecedented and broke the conventional rules of life and death, which is the whole point Molag Bal is trying to make in a sense. Lamae Bal's story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of losing faith. Upon becoming a vampire, she committed terrible atrocities against the tribe herself. It was only after these actions that she turned to Arkay for help. Given her actions and the loss of her innocence, it's not surprising that Arkay, whether she was undead or not, did not or could not answer her plea for help. To clarify why they could not part, we have to first look at how Aedra are set in power in Nirn. The divines in the Elder Scrolls are often criticized for their perceived lack of involvement in mortal affairs, but it's important to consider their limitation. Most of their power is dedicated to maintaining the stability of Nirn. This criticism reflects a bias against religion in Elder Scrolls universe. In reality, the divine could be seen as ideal gods, available when needed but respecting people's autonomy. Each divine has a specific role, such as Mara's forgiveness and care, Zenithar's focus on fair trade and hard work, and Arkay's role in peaceful transition from life to death. The divines are remarkably laid-back deities, and they do not engage in the typical intersect conflicts seen in many religions. Worshippers of Mara, for instance, do not denounce others for their method of worship. The simplest way to understand this is to look at the divines as a compilation of programs that form an operating system. They do what they are programmed to do or what their powers allow them, but most of their power are tied to holding the Nirn together, making it a reality. So in that sense, they are taking an active role. Most of their attention is toward making the world, function. This has been pointed out in universe by Bishop Artorius Ponticus, particularly regarding Akathos. Father Akathos might be considered the most active Aedra of all, as we sense him every second in the passage of time. But people are so biased against even the idea of religions that they will call non-meddling gods whose only real tenets are don't be an asshole jerks. And then those same people will explain very clearly how Molag Bal, the king of rape, isn't actually evil because he is just acting in accordance to his nature. It is however understandable from the perspective of a victim of the Aedra, as mortals we view gods as the all-omnipotent and omnipresent being, and in the time you need them the most, their absence does make you feel like they are useless. The Vigilants of Stendarr. Prior to the formation of Dawnguard, you had two main groups of vigilants in Skyrim. Firstly, the ones seen as extremists who would eventually form the Dawnguard, and secondly, the hobbyists who would all but die out. Once Ezran became frustrated with the Vigil, he took all the ambitious extremists with him to form the Dawnguard, thus leaving the Vigil as a very moderate group who clearly did not see the vampires as a threat. The Vigil was left in a state of dysfunctionality. Nobody really understood how dire the vampire threat was, so they assumed their patrols across Skyrim instead of prepping for war like the Dawnguards. In a world where vampires did not conspire to blot out the sun, the new moderate Vigil would have been fine, and they probably would have lasted longer than the Dawnguard. Reason being, without a notable enemy, the Dawnguard would continue to overexert and overextend itself until it collapsed. But that wasn't the case. The Vigil became a victim of its own ego and ignorance, who refused to understand the rising vampire threats. Under typical circumstances, the Vigil is a moderately organized group consisting of vigilants dedicated to eradicating Daedric influence in the countryside. They are not militarized or highly structured, and the organization likely operates with permissive approach, granting its member a degree of autonomy. Some vigilants may be assigned specific tasks or missions like the one involving Molag Bal in Markarth, or investigating issues like the sleeplessness in Dawnstar. Ezran's perspective is that the Vigil of Stendarr stood little chance against the powerful vampires like those of Volkihar Court and other significant vampire factions. While they could handle small vampire covens in hiding, they lacked a comprehensive strategy or in-game scenario. Ezran argues that the Vigil was essentially a group of hobbyists and religious fanatics who did not fully grasp the cause they were fighting for.
Damn fool. I told him not to go. The Vigilants always had more bravery than sense. Did you at least find out what the vampires were looking for in there?
Instead of fighting to prevent major crises like the Plain Meld or Oblivion Crisis, they were motivated by a general hatred of the Aedra, which Ezran sees as a misguided approach. Ultimately, this lack of preparedness led to their downfall when confronted by more formidable opponents. I think Ezran's problem with the Vigilants stems from them being religious fanatics, or that they were overconfident about themselves, holding a very firm belief that Stendarr will bring them victory. Ezran is a realist, relying on himself and his capabilities, not on a divine. He wanted the Vigilants to be prepared for anything, to train and study, instead of going, "Nah, Stendarr is with us." Or at least that's what I think. The Vigil, in its original form, was more radical and vigorous than the one in Skyrim. It was founded after the Oblivion Crisis and had first-hand understanding of the dangers posed by cultists and Aedra. However, the heavy militarization against Aedra without a constant threat would have drained the organization of resource and morale. Ezran's luck came from the fact that there was a real threat, as he had warned the Vigil. If Ezran had formed the Dawnguard without a tangible danger, his unwarranted radicalism could have eventually led to the faction's collapse as well. The Vigil is considered extreme because of the lack of nuance in their beliefs, and their willingness to try and kill anyone who doesn't abide by them. They'll try and attack you if you've got a Daedric anything on your position, considering the entire Dawnmer races exist, whose primary worship are the Daedras, which is a problem.
Keep your eyes open. Be on your guard at all times. Avoid sleep if you can. Sleep is for the weak.
Ezran is a radical element because he specifically obsesses over the vampire issue, and because he did not think the Vigil was adequately prepared, robed thugs accosting small-time cultists, which is right about. Incidentally, for all their anti-Daedric rhetoric, if they ever came across someone with significant Daedric backing, for example us, the Dragonborn with the mace of Molag Bal, they would be slaughtered. Vampirism versus Lichdom. In the simplest terms, vampirism in the Elder Scrolls is a form of disease, whereas Lichdom is a form of transcended state of being. As stated by Vastari, a CG companion to Manimarco and Venus Galerian, and a Lich dedicated to Azura herself, Lichdom is the pinnacle of undeath, achieved by powerful necromancers who manipulate their souls to gain immense power and extend their lives. To become a Lich, one must channel their soul through phylactery, complex and arduous process requiring a lifetime of study and strong will. This separation of soul and body removes limitation of magical abilities, offering virtually limitless potential. Whereas one could become vampire just transferring the disease from one vampire to another or perform deadly rituals, both resulting in varying level of power considering the purity of the said restraint. Purest or true blood vampires who have gained the powers directly through Molag Bal would be very strong vampire lords, whereas others would be average superhuman blood-sucking creatures. While contesting between these two, however, at the first sight, it does seem like vampirism is much more appealing than Lichdom. You keep your mortal body while becoming virtually immortal and young, while getting superhuman strength along with multiple other powers. Personally, if you are someone who is highly ambitious, Lichdom offers you immense power over vampirism, considering you do not just become immortal, but you are also invulnerable, resurrecting oneself every time you fall. Plus, the magical abilities you can master is virtually infinite because now you have your magical limit broken with your mortal souls gone. This is why the most ambitious and highly talented individual seeks Lichdom instead of vampirism, with characters like Manny Marco surviving throughout the ages and even ascending to literal godhood. Even though it seems similar at face value, vampirism is still a disease which happens to you, whereas Lichdom is something you seek out. Conclusion. And as such, vampirism are people, albeit they tend to skew more on the evil end than non-vampires. There's nothing about the Elder Scrolls vampirism that compels them to become evil. Some choose to be what we generally see as good, some also probably don't have especially good moral inclination, but would still want other vampires in the local area dealt with, simply to remove competition or threats, and not because they are innately evil. And that's it for this video. I hope you gained some insight and enjoyed your time here. With that, I'd like to remind you to like and subscribe, and if I've been unclear or inaccurate in any ways, please feel free to let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.